You know? All right, good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. Thank you. Good evening. And thank you for being here. My name is Henry Garrido. I am the executive director at DC 37, and also I'm the co-chair of the commission, along with Arva Rice, who could not be with us today. I want to make sure that I thank Dennis Wolcott, the president and CEO of the Queens Public Libraries, and the staff of the Flushing branch for hosting us this evening. Tonight, we kick off our second round of public hearings
所以呢，今天的话呢，很高兴大家能到现场，或者是在网上倾听这一场会议哈。那我们这次会议呢，会使用多个语言，在这次的会议中有国语、广东话以及韩文。那如果您在现場的話呢，請你們去前台拿一下那個耳機。如果您在網上的話呢，請你們可以選擇相對應的那個語言翻譯。還有呢，咁咧今次嘅會議咧就唔該晒大家出現啦。咁今次會議咧會有翻譯。如果你喺現場嘅話咧，你可以去前台嗰度咧攞一個耳機。如果你喺網上收聽嘅話，就揀你相對應嘅語言嘅 channel。唔該晒。
여기 현장에 계시거나 방송을 시작하고 계신 분들을 위해서 지금 다국어, 한국어 포함해서 지금 동시 통역이 진행되고 있습니다. 여기 현장에 계신 분들은 필요하시면 그 앞으로 가셔서 뒤쪽에 등록 데스크에서 헤드셋을 요청해 주시면 되겠고요. 만약에 온라인으로 시청하시는 분들은 해당 언어 채널, 그리고 밑에 보면은 이렇게 지구본이 있는데 그걸 누르면 해당 언어가 나옵니다. 그걸 누르면 이제 동시 통역을 서비스를 제공받게 됩니다. 감사합니다.
Thank you. The commission has been empaneled to conduct a thorough review of the charter and craft proposals to be put before the voters. This is our chance to create a better functioning city, one that is more transparent in its activities and more accountable to the people. It is an opportunity to make changes to ensure our city is less vulnerable to manipulation, corruption, or fraud. I know that all my colleagues take this responsibility very seriously. While the commission was convened via local law passed by the city council, we are an independent body, regardless of the merits. Any proposal that can be achieved by local law will likely not be up for our consideration. The commission will not consider any proposals that weaken local democracy or New Yorkers' rights. Shall I continue or should I wait for any interpretation services? Okay, cool. Right. Our first rounds of borough hearings and through meetings with the community partners and organizations, we received many suggestions on what to change in the charter. Following that process, the commission staff produced a preliminary report outlining several focus areas for our consideration, including government accountability, budget transparency, and land use. Our second round of hearings will concentrate on these topics, with each hearings covering one topic. Tonight, for instance, we will hear testimony on budget transparency. A final note on the process: we are not the only commission tasked with viewing the charter. The commission is distinct from the Charter Revision Commission convened by the mayor. Both commissions are working simultaneously but separate. Let me start by introducing the commissioners or asking them to introduce themselves. But first, I'd like to introduce Harry Isaac Black, which is joining us today as our counsel. Please give him a hand. Give him a hand. And now I'd like to ask the members of the commission to briefly introduce themselves, starting with Commissioner Agarwal.
Good evening, Rahul Agarwal. I was appointed by the mayor. Thanks.
Mark Winston Griffith, appointed by Public Advocate Jumani Williams.
I'm Manny Pastrich. I had the honor of being appointed by the Speaker of the City Council.
Dr. Ram Raju, appointed by the Staten Island Borough President.
Joanne Yu, appointed by the Adams.
Rachel Goodman, appointed by the New York City Comptroller.
Good evening, everyone. Matt Kowal, member of the commission appointed by the Manhattan Borough President.
Good evening, Robert Maraglia, appointed by Bronx Borough President Vanessa L. Gibson.
Good evening, I'm Alan Swisher. I was appointed by Queensborough President Donovan Richards.
We also have some members join us via Zoom. So would you like to introduce yourselves, Commissioner?
Sure. Michael Rasiopo, appointed by Brooklyn Borough President Antonio Reynoso.
Can everybody hear that? Can you put that volume slightly higher, please? Good. All right, let's do that again. I'm sorry. We couldn't hear
No
you.
problem. Michael Rasiopo, appointed by Brooklyn Borough President Antonio Reynoso.
Thank you all for being here. Let us proceed. Before we start, we'd like to start with the adoption of the minutes corresponding for the meeting March 18th and 20th and March 24 hearings. They've been distributed to everyone. Please just make sure that, just as a note, the commissioners that are present, whether all commissioners can vote to adopt the minutes, whether they were present or not. Any objections to the adoptions of the minutes? If not, we'll take a motion. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes for March 18th, 20th, and 24th? Motion has been made. Do I have a second? Any questions, any corrections? Hearing none, let's take a vote. All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any nays? Any abstentions? The ayes have it in so order. So let us move forward. The next item on the agenda is a consideration of a resolution calling on the New York State Legislature to pass and the governor to sign S 590-A-3665, which is a bill that would repeal a provision that disallows the referendum proposals on the ballot when the mayor's city charter revision commission submits the proposal. And let me read a little bit about this. In New York City, voters must approve certain changes to the city charter, to the charter proposed by the city charter commission, the city council, or the voters. However, the mayor has currently the ability to quote, bump, unquote, any of the other charter amendments from the ballot simply by appointing a charter revision commission and having that commission propose a charter amendment, regardless of scope. This limits the voters' ability to affect meaningful changes to the city's governance. The bill would prevent the mayoral commission from bumping any other commission amendments from the ballot. Okay. Do I hear a motion to accept the resolution calling on the New York State Legislature to pass and the governor to sign S 98-3665?
That's a question about
Well, let's take a motion first. Let's
okay.
take a second, and then in the discussion, we'll do that.
I see. Okay.
So moved.
Motion has been made. Any second?
Second.
Motion has been made and properly second. Now, let's go into questions. Go ahead.
I don't have necessarily a substantive objection. I was just, is it Is there, I guess what I'm wondering is, have previous charter revision commissions adopted these kinds of resolutions on the state matters? I don't know if anyone knows or from the staff.
Yeah, I can tell you from experience, we had
Oh, really?
serving in a racial justice commission, so
Okay.
to this that we did.
Thank you.
Any other questions on the resolution? Okay, hearing now, let's move and take a vote. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstention? The ayes have it and so order. So why don't, let's see. We have a list of people there. Yeah, so why don't we, so we're gonna turn a little bit today on the substance, and I wanna take a moment to talk about the portion of tonight's agenda, which will focus on budget transparency. As the commission staff indicated in its preliminary report, there are a number of areas that New York's local democracy could be strengthened by improving budget transparency and accountability. This includes strengthening the independence of oversight agencies by establishing baseline investments, providing greater transparency into appropriations, spending, and revenue forecasting, clarifying when the mayor can hold spending approved by the city council, setting rules on the road for adding to and withdrawing from reserves, and adding new voices and diversity to city's government rulemaking body. At nearly 115 billion annual budget, New York City has come a long way from the physical crisis of the 1970s, when the city was near bankruptcy. The city no longer runs annual budget, current account deficits, and has strong revenues, greater than those of 46 states. The fund's current expenditures and debt payments. The city bond rating remains very high or highly rated. And despite these improvements, our current fiscal framework has grown outdated with a wide range of financial issues under consideration. The commission is interested in hearing more tonight about how we can update the charter to better support our government's economic responsibility to the people of New York. Before we begin hearing testimony, I remind those in attendance that this is a formal government hearing and that the quorum must be always observed. As such, audience members shall remain silent at all times. If you intend to testify today but have not yet registered to do so, we will accept registration up to the first 30 minutes of tonight's hearing. The witness table is reserved for people who wish to testify. Video recording or photography is not allowed from the witness table. At tonight's hearings, we will ask folks to limit their testimony to 3 minutes. I will let you know when your time is up. While tonight's hearing focuses on budget transparency, we welcome any testimony on the proposed revision to the charter. Commissioners are encouraged to ask questions based on the testimony given. I'd like to invite our first witness to the table, Richard Lee, Director of the City's Council Finance Division, up to the witness table. Please make sure you introduce yourself before you begin your testimony, and please limit your statement to 3 minutes. How are you?
Hi, how are you?
Good evening.
Can you hear me? I'll do my best to limit it to 3 minutes. My name is Richard Lee. I am the Finance Director for the New York City Council. I want to thank the Commission for their opportunity to speak today. The preliminary staff report to the Commission outlines several proposals that seek to increase budget transparency and make the budget process more effective. In my testimony today, I will address the importance of these proposals and expand upon them to provide further insight into the budget process. Each year, the City Council, the city's policymaking branch of government, adopts the city budget, the primary policy document. Budget adoption typically occurs at the end of June, prior to the beginning of the next fiscal year, but adoption is only one point in the budget process. The city's budget is not a static document, but rather a series, series of modifications that are set throughout the year. The city's charter requires the mayor to make regular financial updates through the submission of 4 financial plans: the November plan, preliminary budget, executive budget, and adopted budget, each of which trigger budget modifications. Through each phase of the budget cycle, the city council has several charter mandated responsibilities. But unfortunately, some of the council's most critical responsibilities set forth in the charter are ambiguous and oblique, creating situations where the mayor has circumvented the intent of the charter and upset balance of powers between the legislative and executive branches of government. The asymmetry in the budget process is probably most evident in regard to the forecasting of revenues. Typically, budgets are viewed as a set of spending priorities that directly reflect policymaking determinations. Because the charter mandates that the city budget be balanced, the amount of expenditures in the budget are directly correlated with the level of revenues. Currently, the charter bestows the mayor the sole responsibility for determining how much revenue is recognized at adoption and throughout the fiscal year. To be clear, the mayor's power to set revenue forecasts is solely about when the revenues are recognized and not about how much is ultimately collected. The mayor, for example, can forecast that the city will collect $20 billion in personal income taxes in a year, but that does not necessarily mean that at the end of the year, the city will actually collect $20 billion. Rather, the revenues generated in a particular year are a product of a number of factors outside the mayor's control, including the economy, tax laws adopted by the city and state. Similarly, the size and timing of categorical grants that the city receives are largely a function of grantors of those funds through the city's agencies do have a role in successfully submitting applications for those funds. Despite this limitation, the power of when to recognize revenues is a critical one. Recognizing revenues, so when they actually get put into the budget, late in the fiscal year makes it extremely difficult to allocate those resources in an effective and efficient manner and undermines the ability for the council to negotiate the budget as an equal partner. The estimation of revenue should be determined objectively based on economic and historical factors and not subject to politicization. But in reality, the mayor's sole authority to set revenue levels is a significant power that gives him an upper hand in negotiating the budget. Consider the adoption of the fiscal year 2024 budget. After a number of austerity financial plans in which the administration reduced spending across agencies, during budget negotiations, the city council sought to make restorations to many of those municipal services. The city council knew the cost to restore those needed services based on the information gleaned from the many weeks of public hearings and the amount of dollars that are available, but the amount of dollars that were actually available was not as evident. While the council was able to make its own estimation through our forecasts of revenue, it's still beholden to the framework set forth by the administration's revenue forecast. The amount available to make critical restorations was based on how much and when the revenue was recognized by the administration, either adoption or throughout all other phases of the budget. In FY24, the administration held back revenues at adoption, only recognizing additional funds throughout the year, which undermined the city council's ability to equitably negotiate the budget. In that year, we adopted a budget that included $71.1 billion in city tax revenue. But by the close of the year, actual collections were $74.2 billion, or 4.4% greater. So while the council's revenue estimates made at adoption were lower than the actual collections, we were still a lot closer than what the administration had estimated. So had even a portion of those revenues been recognized at adoption, the negotiations for the fiscal 2024 budget could have been more robust and fruitful, and we could have avoided the inefficient task of cutting services only to restore them midway through the year. Exacerbating the potential for politicization of revenue estimates and the asymmetry of the power it creates is the fact that the mayor is actually able to amend his revenue estimates prior to adoption of the budget, as long as it is, quote unquote, fiscally necessary to do so due to changed circumstances, and as long as he provides this written determination to the council.
Mr. Lee, I'm going to ask you to summarize because
Sure.
going beyond.
If you give me like another minute. So as long as the As long as the administration decides that the negotiations aren't going well, they can unilaterally submit a letter to the city council after the executive budget has been submitted to re-estimate the revenue, thereby making it difficult for the city council to actually negotiate. This was a fact that happened in 1998 when Mayor Giuliani and Speaker Bellone attempted to negotiate a budget. The speaker then tried to put through a non-negotiated budget in which the mayor then reduced the rest estimates for the revenue intentionally to undercut the ability for the city council to actually pass the budget. We have issues with under forecasting of revenues that create transparency issues because most of the dollars that are underestimated and then realized in the middle of the year are actually put towards closing future year gaps. So we don't actually know the fiscal situation of the city's budget because all those mid-year adjustments to revenues that could have been recognized earlier are instead going towards closing gaps. The last time I actually want to bring up are budget modifications and units of appropriation because as part of the city budget process, each one of these financial plans, the city council has to pass budget modifications, either on the expense side or the revenue side. But the powers delineated by the charter, which is to amend, well, I have the exact wording. It was to add, subtract, no, increase, decrease, add, or omit to any unit of appropriation is outlined in the charter, but it doesn't specifically state what we are allowed to do and if we are allowed to create new units of appropriation when a budget function already exists for that. And the last point I wanted to bring up is mayoral powers or impoundment. So the charter seemingly creates this power to create a power balance between the city council and the mayor by giving the city council the ability to amend the unit for appropriations and adopt our own budget. But the mayor has a power of impoundment, meaning that similarly what we see are in the federal government with the Trump administration, who is refusing to put out dollars that this Congress has already appropriated. Similarly, the mayor has powers of impoundment to refuse to spend dollars that the city council has ultimately passed in the budget. And we don't see why there is a need to have any impoundment powers. If there was a need to change the budget because of outstanding essential circumstances of the economy, we can always do that through budget modifications, a process that already exists. So I'm happy to take any questions. I do apologize for taking a few more minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Are there any questions for this witness? All right, go ahead.
Hi. On the revenue forecasting, do you have a recommendation specifically about how to get around the initial recommendations coming out of OMB?
So there have been a couple of proposals put in the past. One that we have looked at and have been seeing if it's a viable option is having some sort of like a consensus revenue projection. There are several different government monitors who also do their own revenue projections. Again, it's a projection.
Yep.
But we have a room full of economists who are trying to agree on something which is almost nearly impossible. But we do have different government agencies, including the Comptroller's Office, City Council, IBO, and OMB, who are all putting out revenue forecasts. And I think if there is some way that we can have a consensus on what we actually determine is the revenues, it'll take out a lot of the issues that the City Council has when we're trying to pass the budget. We go in and say we want $500 million to restore, universal pre-K. But if the administration is saying, well, we're not recognizing these additional revenues at this time, we don't have it, then there's no recourse for that, right? So we're having additional consensus on revenues might be helpful, and it's something that we have explored.
So I'm gonna get super nitty gritty for a minute. Because I did check with the Comptroller's Office's budget lead on this proposal because Borough President Mark Levine actually made a similar proposal in the last round of hearings, and so I was curious. And one of the things they brought up is that it actually is a credit rating negative to have consensus budget estimates. The credit rating agencies don't actually like that as a practice, so that's just something to be aware of. And also wanted me to point out that that is what they do in Albany, and their budget is always late. So consensus forecasting actually can allow for more consensus and discussion, but it also can be a slowing factor in some of the negotiations. So I want to put those 2 points out there as even coming from an office that might gain more control in this space. a lot of our budget experts are actually not fans of the
So,
idea.
so that's why we've been exploring it. Well, the city budget can't be late, right? We're on a
Fair enough.
deadline. So we aren't able to pass any budget extenders. So we are on a deadline to pass by June 30th. And we have heard that, the argument for that, and this is why we have been saying that we are sort of exploring it. So on the flip side, what also be beneficial is for the city to provide the actual revenues that they're going to recognize, right? Because we don't get that at executive budget. The executive budget, they send a revenue estimation for the executive budget, and then that stays, and we have to pass a final revenue recognition at adoption, right? Because the budget's in 4 phases. We do adoption, and then November, January, preliminary budget, executive budget. At each one of the phases, we are updating the current year budget. And we do get a revenue model at the end of the year. We don't know what it is. So even getting that upfront will actually change the balance of power when the city council is actually negotiating for the budget, right? So that is another alternative on, what it is that we can get in terms of information. Instead of blindly going in and saying, we think this is the estimate for revenues coming in, and we think this is what the estimate for resources are, actually getting that upfront, right, before we pass the budget might actually also come to the same conclusion of a more transparent budget.
Thank you. I think with all due respect, I don't know that Albany will be the best example that we want to follow here in the city. But I think I want to ask a question about impoundment, which you raised, particularly as it applies to budgeted positions. Quite often, the council negotiates a budget with the mayor that has staffing issues, and then OMB issues a PEG or a hiring freeze or a 2-for-1 or a 3-for-1, often right after the budget adoption, which delays the implementation of a lot of the things that were agreed upon. We have about 22,000 vacancies right now in the city of New York, and we're not moving on them for the most part. So my question to you is, how do you think this charter commission should view this in terms of changing that dynamic of the powers of the council, the purse of the council in appropriating funds that the city is not spending for hiring folks that they should be?
Yeah, so we have negotiated many positions to be put back in as part of budget negotiations across many different agencies, including Department of Investigation, Parks. So whenever this happens, the administration then would be funded through our budget negotiations for a very specific number of headcount. And at the end of the day, they actually might or might not, usually not, hire those positions out. So it goes to a similar, it's not, it doesn't necessarily scream empowerment, but it goes to the same sort of power that the administration has, that the executive has in whether or not to spend dollars that has been allocated for a very specific purpose. In the past, and maybe even currently, we're not really sure, but it could be done intentionally because vacancies that are budgeted all get swept at the end of the year as additional funds for the year, right? And we roll it to the following year to pay for out year gaps. So if we have 22,000 vacancies that we're paying for that actually didn't get paid out budgetarily, then that's 22,000 times whatever the average salary is, let's say $100,000 that the city saves, and then it puts that towards the future year. Right, so there's also a financial incentive in order not to hire if the city was trying to not hide money, but find a place where it can sort of park money that it's not intentionally spending. I think that there needs to be a way to put the executive branch on, not noted, but make them have a way so that they actually spend the dollars that are finally negotiated at the adopted budget, right? If it's headcount, then they should actually go through with the process of posting jobs and going towards hiring all the headcount instead of simply budgeting it in and using things like 2-for-1 or hiring freezes in order to hold those positions and then later sweep it at the end. So that is an executive power that we should figure out how to sort of ensure that they are spending in the same way that we have to look at empowerment, because it's the exact same action, right? It's a refusal to spend dollars that is finally negotiated and put into the budget.
Thank you. Commissioner Renfrew.
Thank you, Chairman. I followed your comments with a lot of interest, and just as a comment, in a private industry, if you really miss the revenue forecast or miscalculate your revenue forecast, your stock prices take a huge hit. And if it happens too often, you lose your job. That's what usually happens. So you are probably aware of that.
Mhm.
That also happens in hospital private industry. If I run a hospital system, which I ran, if I grossly mismanage or my revenue forecast, then I'm accountable to
Mhm.
whatever needs to be done. So I'm kind of fascinated to see that how these forecasts are being kind of either not appropriately forecasted or what happened. So can you give me a kind of ballpark figure? How many times the revenue forecast have been changed in a year? And how close they are at the end of the year to what was initially forecasted?
So it changes all throughout the year, and
How many times?
so that's part of the issue that we have, right? Is recognition of money. So the administration, the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, gets to decide when it actually recognizes it, right? Puts it on paper. They might know how much property taxes were received, but when to actually put it into the budget is the one part of the issue, right? By the time the November plan comes out in November, we already know what tax revenue we received from March through July, August, September, but they usually recognize those dollars in January when they have to balance the out year gaps, right? So it's about recognition. The dollars in terms of your question about how many times it changes throughout the year. So in each part of the plan, it will usually change in one form or another, with the recognition of new revenues here and there. Ultimately up to OMB to decide when to do it. But the criticism that I think a lot of organizations and even us, the city council, has is that the city has been overly cautious and overly conservative in its revenue estimates. So I'll give you 2024 as an example. I think they passed the budget at 12.4 billion, 112.4 billion, and we ended the year at 116.5 billion, right? So we're off by several billions of dollars. And so even if we are to recognize a portion of that, we're not even saying, oh, we should have done all four, right? But even a small portion of that, $500 million, right? Or $250 million, even going a little bit higher, would have actually helped tremendously in that very specific fiscal year, because that was a year that there was cuts that were being made across the entire city, right? Cuts for libraries, youth programs, universal pre-K, like everything was being slashed because of austerity measures. Even a few more dollars would have helped a few more policy programs, a few more organizations. There were programs that were slashed at $12 million entirely, and we never got those back, right? So even a few more dollars would have helped, is what we're the point that I'm trying to make.
Thank you, Chairman. And thank you for your testimony. It's very helpful. So my question follows from the previous commissioner's question a little bit. Is I mean, to me, the accountability systems are the city council's power to approve the budget or not approve it, and to make amendments and go through that process, or the voters' ability to say, I'm not happy that this program was cut or not cut. Why don't you think that's enough?
So you outlined two items. So I'll go with the first one, where the city council can vote not to pass the budget, right? So ultimately, you want to get to a place where we are and we're fiscally responsible in passing the budget. The city charter outlines a process where the city council can actually pass its own non-negotiated budget. We can just do it ourselves. But then it sort of becomes almost meaningless because of the mayor's powers of impoundment, right? So that check system against the executive is actually sort of wiped away, because even if we were to adopt our own non-negotiated budget, which hasn't been attempted since 1998, but even if we were to attempt it, the executive branch could all still refuse to spend those dollars, right? The secondary check on that is through the use of budget modifications. So throughout each plan, whenever there are changes to the expense budget or the revenue budget, the expense side or revenue side of the budget, the city council has to take action for what's called a budget modification, either an expense modification to the expense side of spending or a revenue modification on the revenue side of spending. But if we feel that certain changes are necessary, the charter doesn't fully outline those powers. It sort of vaguely references it, and we have a legal understanding that we have that power. But I think the charter can do a little bit better in specifying that the city council has the ability to create new units of appropriation whenever we feel that a better transparent budget is necessary. So a unit of appropriation is sort of like the building blocks of the budget, right? We categorize it. So we have an agency budget, and we have unit of appropriation for personnel services, or unit of appropriation for OTPS, for UPK. and then it gets further broken down by categories, right? So, let's say, for example, NYPD overtime. Say NYPD overtime right now sits in the chief of department's budget. If the city council says, you know what, because it's such a large portion of the budget, more than $1 billion, we want to create its own unit of appropriation. We don't actually know, the charter sort of hints at that we have that power, but we don't have that fully enumerated. And it could be challenged because the charter is intentionally or unintentionally kind of vague about it. Our legal experts have always told us that we do have that power, but having that fully fleshed out in the charter will be like one way that we can close this gap of the power imbalance between the mayor and the city council. And the impoundment factor that I mentioned earlier will help close and make it more an equitable sharing of power when we pass the budget.
So is it your testimony that there was the charter, this commission should look at creating a unit of appropriation specifically to that of police overtime?
No, not necessarily. It's that, if the city, a lot of these items we negotiate with the administration on. So we create new unit for appropriations all the time and we negotiate that out with the city. If there was an instance where we are unable to negotiate something and we wanted to create a new unit of appropriation, we want to make sure that the charter fully enumerates those powers more clearly so that it creates a better balance between the mayor and the city council's roles in the budget process. And on the impoundment factor, we don't necessarily think that impoundment is a necessary item or necessary power that the mayor should have, only because if there were extenuating circumstances in which impoundment was necessary because of outside economic factors, all those changes could be made through a budget modification at any time.
But after the fact?
But, I'm sorry?
Are you suggesting that be done after the fact?
Budget modifications? It could be the administration could send us a budget modification anytime it wants.
I'm talking specifically the other way around. If the appropriation becomes so large, you're suggesting there ought to be a process by which you can declare a new U of A, right?
Yes.
Right.
Or to better enumerate those powers.
But after adoption.
We could anytime,
I see. Okay.
because so the charter outlines that whenever the city council receives a revenue mod, that the powers that are enumerated in the charter for the executive budget actually kick in. So we get full budget powers whenever we get a revenue modification, right? But the ability to create new unit of appropriations within that are sometimes ambiguous. So overtime is a very good example because what the charter states is that if there is already a program that exists, then you cannot create a new unit of appropriation for that. A new unit of appropriation has to be a new thing, right? So we can't simply create an overtime unit of appropriation right now because that already exists within a budget code under a unit of appropriation, right? So we want it to be a little bit more clear is what we're trying to get at.
Go. Sorry. Commissioner.
Question. I think I'm asking this question for all the nonprofits. It's a nerve-wracking time for everybody as we are getting news about all the federal cuts right now. Nonprofits are getting letters and they're in the process of laying staff off or trying to figure out how they're going to manage when the need for services is increasing. And so my question is around reserves and the rainy day fund, and when will the council and OMB, when do you determine how to release some of that funding? Because, come November, when there's an update, it is the most anxiety-filled time for nonprofits because we're like, oh my God, are we going to get our money? What are they going to cut? So we know there's money in reserves, but how does that work? I mean, like the rainy day fund, and when does it get released? Because right now the service providers are just really struggling right now to figure out how to keep their doors open.
Yeah. So there's two types of reserves, right? There are what we call in-year reserves and then rolling reserves. So the rolling reserves are the rainy day fund, which was created, rather recently, a few years ago, and the RHBT, the Retiree Health Benefit Trust, which was the actual rainy day fund before we created the rainy day fund because it sort of acts like a pass-through. So the rainy day fund should be our actual reserve. And we're allowed to, at any time given that at the year, if we have a surplus, the city can choose money to put into the rainy day fund, and it'll stay in there perpetually. The in-year reserves, we have two in-year reserves. One is our general reserve, and then we have the capital stabilization reserve. So the in-year reserves don't carry over. Those dollars are sort of just put in there in case we need to tap those dollars to solve any sort of issues that might arise within the current year's budget. The in-year reserve is largely tapped to close out your gaps, right? So we're largely using it to close out your gaps. So it's not going towards anything other than out your gaps, which is a budgeting issue. But the rolling reserve, our rainy day fund, we have dollars in it, but it's also up to the administration to choose when to recognize those dollars and tap into the rainy day fund. There's no other sort of guidance or outline of when the rainy day fund should be tapped into. Right? And this is something that we've brought up over the last 2 years when we had the austerity budgets that we had to pass. In that we said, you know what, we have a rainy day fund. Let's use some of those dollars in order to help carry some of the organization, nonprofits, and the city through this sort of challenging time in the economy, because we were faced with not only the increased costs for asylum seekers, but we had inflation across the city, which was impacting the economy too as well. And so the city council has stated that we should look to the rainy day fund, actually create a process in which this is when we will tap it. But that doesn't exist, right? And it still doesn't exist, and it's entirely up to the administration to recognize that, because it's a revenue source. They can recognize the revenue coming from the rainy day fund and choose when to tap it.
Anyone else? Go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I'm just trying to, thank you for the testimony. I'm just trying to figure out sort of as this commission, what we do with your testimony. And so I guess the question I would just ask is, as the guy at city council who it sounds like is sort of knee deep in all of the budgetary issues, and speaking a language that I don't speak, right? I mean, I guess my question is, what is if you were to sort of say, hey, here's the one thing that, I think is really sort of critical to fix within the city charter that you guys can do that would really sort of help, with respect to the budgeting process. Like, what is there that one thing, I'm just trying to sort of cut through a little bit of it to get to a point where we say, okay,
Yeah.
I get it, that's the proposal.
Yeah, I think there's two main things.
Okay.
All right. So, and they both are related to adoption of the budget. When we go through the adoption and negotiation process, once the executive budget comes out, I think these are the two main things. Number one is the empowerment power. Because that exists, and the city council can't ever say, all right, we want to do our own non-negotiated budget, right? That power of the city council to bring balance on the council side is hampered in a lot of ways, because the administration, the mayor can say, we're just going to impound these funds, right? I think the second thing is the recognition of revenues. We go into negotiations without actually knowing what the final revenue numbers are going to be. And so if you were to get that ahead, when we after the executive budget comes out and prior to adoption, not on the day of adoption, right? Because that's when we usually get it. But prior to that, then we'll know the exact envelope that we are negotiating, right? If they tell us, oh, you know what, we only have $1 billion to add, make restorations for all these programs, let's figure it out, right? Then we're stuck with $1 billion, but it turns out there's actually 1.5 billion, right? That's the thing that I think we should make more transparent, right? Because that's a transparency and a better budgeting issue.
So I get, on number two, I think I get, you're basically saying sort of earlier in the process, change the charter such that there's a requirement that revenue be recognized.
Final revenues for that current year be recognized.
Okay. The first one, I'm just in terms of clarity, are you suggesting, because the power to impound currently exists in the city charter?
Yes.
So is your proposal to remove that power?
Yes.
Okay.
We don't think it's necessary, only because the rules for impoundment are there to address sort of any extenuating circumstances that might have, right, with the budget. But any changes to the budget can still be resolved through modifications that they submit as current practice, right? Budget and expense and revenue modifications that they will have to submit. And so, an action of impoundment doesn't really necessarily make sense. Going back to what the Commissioner Garrido said about the mayoral powers of spending, we could appropriate all the dollars that we want, and if the executive branch refuses to spend them, then it becomes almost fruitless, right? So we're trying to curb that power as much as we can.
I'm sorry, I'm kind of confused. So if the budget does not reflect the reality, that means the revenues are not properly accounted for in the sense that they decide when to account for it, depending on whatever reasons are. And on the expenditure side, you decide not to spend the money. Then what is the purpose of the budget law at the end of the day?
Nobody knows. So the administration always has actual revenue numbers, right? Because their Department of Finance collects property taxes, collects all their fees. So they would know at any given point in the year, like how much revenues are going to be coming in, right? So that is a reality that no other fiscal monitor, we don't know that information. But the administration always does. And so they choose when to actually put it into the budget. That's the issue that we have. Revenues are always going to be updated because at one point, when we adopt the budget, we are forecasting outwards, right? We're saying, oh, you know what? This year, we think there's going to be $75 billion in tax revenue. But through each of the phases, we update that, right? So in November plan, we update it. In the preliminary budget, we update it. In the executive budget, we again update it. And then when the budget is adopted with the adopted budget, a whole year has gone by. We know exactly how much money we have, right? So by that point, we know what the city knows what the revenue is, but the city is the only one that sort of knows what the revenue is, right? And when they want to recognize it as budgetary numbers, it's entirely up to them, right? So that's the issue that we have.
Perhaps question. So when do you know?
So that's a good question. So we know largely it gets a little tricky. So there's multiple points in which dollars on both the expense side and the revenue side, move around and gets, reallocated for one reason. They might say, you know what, this thing that we have for 3K, we don't want to use city money anymore. We're going to put it towards federal, like saving city money. So we actually finally know, like for sure, after adopted budget. The budget is adopted, and then during the month of July and August, it's kind of like your credit card. You know how you're paying back, right? So July and August is the time the city pays back, right? We have our June invoices come in, and everyone pays off their June stuff. So in July and August, the city closes its books, the comptroller releases the ACFR, the annual comprehensive financial report. And that's when we look and see exactly what the final numbers are, right? So we don't get those final numbers until well after the budget is passed. But during that time, that gap between July and August, the city can still unilaterally sort of make some changes here and there without a modification. They can recognize different federal dollars at different times, right? Do a couple of tricks here and there to switch city money and state money and federal money to save the city some money and then save that and pocket it somewhere else. So we don't fully know until, what the actuals are until the fiscal year finally closes out in July and August. So one of the things that the council has said was, well, at the final closeout, we should actually have a mod for that to amend the year that we just closed out, but that's a separate issue.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, I can see that. So given this dance that we are always facing, this kabuki theater,
Yes.
the budget process, what role you think independent or separate agencies, maybe not independent is the right word, like the Independent Budget Office, which I'm a advisory member, or the City Controller's Office testifying, or even the state controllers, as to the finances of the city, should they play prior to the budget adoption process?
I'm not entirely sure. So we do count on, so all of the monitors, we have different information, right? And we sort of all get together and we sort of share all our information. The controller's office has very good insight on actual spending. IBO gets insight on things that the controller or the city council doesn't get. We have different pieces of information. So throughout that process, throughout the budget process, we have everyone come in and give us that information. We share information with each other. So, our powers combine, Captain Planet kind of thing, and we're able to kind of piece together what we think it is. But I don't know what further than that. We haven't thought about what further than that other roles that the controller and the IBO could play. But it is crucially important what they do because they provide to the council additional information that we don't have, right? When we get to budget negotiation time. So I can think of what other additional roles we can expand, but I don't particularly have that at this time.
Anyone else? Sorry, I should introduce you. Commissioner Lopez joined us from the beginning of the introduction. Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Richard, for your testimony. Good to see you here today. Couple of questions. Changing gears, I think your testimony, especially on use appropriation and budget revenue forecasting, has been very helpful. I want to change gears to procurement, and just want to sort of ask the council's perspective. The charter sets up a process where the mayor has almost complete power over procurement, right? As a majority of the appointees on the procurement policy board, agencies issue RFPs, MOX oversees them. So my question is, does this system work in your estimation for making sure that one, goods that are contracted out are being done in a timely manner, and two, that we have sufficient oversight? I mean, I know the controller's office obviously has their role with contract registration, but just wanted to make sure that we're properly taking a look at that as well. Something that's been kicked around a lot during our first round of hearings was modifying or adding another member to the PPB. So wanted to get your thoughts on that as well.
I mean, I don't necessarily see any negative with adding additional members to the PPB. I think the issues that we have is that agencies across the board they follow PPB rules, but the internal operations of how they pay out, how they contract is sort of different agency by agency, right? So we see this a lot with nonprofit contracts. That's the one item that we hear it a lot of, in that if you go to DYCD, the contracting process, while it follows procurement rules, is wildly different from contract registration to payment compared to like a ACS or a DFTA. Across different agencies, they all follow the same PPB rules, but the internal operation process is not the same. So, we have always thought that MOX, the Mayor's Office of Contracts, could really play that role, because technically right now, the Director of MOX is also the Chief Procurement Officer for the city. And so our hope was that that'll sort of be able to be normalized and made all practices be normalized and similar across the board. But that hasn't happened. That's one of the reasons why there was a legislation that we're actually hearing tomorrow to further empower the Mayor's Office of Contracts to elevate it to an actual department and have that oversight power, right? But that's I think the main problem that we have with the contracts and payments and things like that. The PPB rules, while it does have issues and it could definitely benefit from additional members from additional parties, is the application of it across the board that's sort of different and causing a lot of the issues that we have.
Thanks. And then my other question regards the 2024 Charter Revision Commission put proposals that change the fiscal impact statement process. Usually that's something that the council puts out. Last year's charter revision required that the mayor also put out something after introduction, and also again before aging. So how has it worked? Is it necessary? Has it really changed how the council proposes legislation and passes legislation? Should we take a look at amending it?
So as my division is the one that actually puts all those documents together. So in previous practice, we only had to do financial impact statements for bills that we were going to pass, right? And that made a lot of sense in terms of a resource issue, because legislation sometimes get written and we want to hear them and then figure out what the issues are. Not only that, once a bill is going through the aging process, it also gets negotiated, because maybe one thing or another needs to conform with one policy or another. And so it was a lot easier for us to conceptualize the costs of everything once the bill was finalized, right? Now we're in a position where we have to do a fiscal impact statement for all bills being heard, some of which we do, some of which will never pass because of one reason or another, right? But in order to, comply, we are doing fiscal impact statements for every single one of these. We receive from the Office of Management Budget a fiscal impact statement, of which we always provide our own. And so it created a lot of additional sort of work that has to be done for a piece of legislation that is not yet finalized or might not even pass, right? So I would say that it's become overly burdensome when we do definitely want to know the cost of a program if we're going to pass it, right? But it's become overly burdensome because we are attaching it to every single bill that is moving.
Every bill, meaning even bills that normally you wouldn't consider having, that would normally not have a fiscal impact?
Yes.
So there are a lot of these statements that will say no.
Zero.
fiscal
Yeah,
impact.
no fiscal impact. Yeah. So we have, most of them are no fiscal impact. I'd say the vast majority are no fiscal impact.
All right, thank you. We got to move on. We got a lot more testimony. I want to thank you, Mr. Lee, for your testimony today. We're going to call our next witness.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Forgive me if I mispronounce this, but no D. Barnes? Sorry about that. Could you just state your name for the record, please?
Yes, my name's Nafti Faines. Thank you to the New York City Commission to Strengthen Local Democracy for holding this hearing and for giving us the opportunity to testify.
Just speaking to the mic, please, because we have folks listening online.
Okay. Is this good enough?
That's
Okay,
better.
that's
Thank
good.
you.
Okay, I'll just start from the top. Thank you to the commission for the opportunity to testify today on the topic of budget transparency in local government. I am Navdeep Bains. I'm the Associate Director of Advocacy and Policy at the Asian American Federation, where we proudly represent the collective voice of more than 70 member nonprofit organizations that serve 1.5 million Asian New Yorkers. Budget transparency is a cornerstone of democratic governance. It ensures that residents, advocates, and policymakers have access to timely, accurate, and detailed information about how public funds are allocated and spent. I see the timer is not on, but I promise I'm timed to 3 minutes.
He's keeping.
Okay.
Don't worry.
The complexity of New York City's budget structure, however, and its amendment process makes it really difficult for community members to truly understand where our money is going. So we're here advocating on behalf of nonprofits, the nonprofit sector generally, as Joanne mentioned, but also we specifically serve the Asian community. The commission's report that was released highlights several ongoing challenges, and drawing from the report and broader best practices, AAF is in support of the following recommendations I'd like to make. The city should create clearer, more defined terms around units of appropriation. This could include mandating that large units of appropriation be disaggregated into more specific programmatic lines to ensure public accountability and facilitate a clearer understanding of how taxpayer dollars are spent. Agencies should be required to break down funding by specific program areas, especially for services that impact marginalized communities. A functional definition of units of appropriation should be enshrined in the charter to ensure public transparency and council oversight. Another recommendation is to streamline our procurement system. We could do this by cutting unnecessary steps that delay contract registration and payment, setting and enforcing strict internal deadlines for contract execution and reimbursement, and by requiring public reporting on registration times, payment delays, and contractor demographics. The nonprofit sector is struggling right now with all of the different changes that it's experiencing from other parts of government, and the city's funding is that much more important to ensure that our local CBOs can support our community. What contracting delays looks like is our CBOs are having to do the work and get reimbursed a year later. What that looks like is families not getting the mental health support that they need to prevent crises from happening. Our CBOs are on the ground. I mean, our community, especially in the Asian community, but all communities of color really rely on non-clinical practices and our CBOs who they trust to meet with, to support them. And so these are the types of services that are struggling when our city is delaying contracts. And when we ask our CBOs, out of our 70 CBOs, what can we do to advocate for you on the city level? The number one thing they say is help get our contracts sooner. And that is sadly a perpetual delay that we all experience. Another recommendation is to create a system of checks and balances. A new term I learned was impoundments today. So impoundments should be restricted to clearly defined emergencies. There should also be an established process of council review and a mechanism for the council to challenge inappropriate impoundments. The last recommendation is to strengthen participatory budgeting and ensure that language access and community outreach are prioritized so all New Yorkers can engage meaningfully. People in our community, we invited our nonprofits to join us, and Case is here. Just shout out, thankfully they're here. But we noticed going through the report and just trying to explain this whole process all together, it's really hard for people in our community to understand it. Half of us in the Asian community in the city are limited English language proficient. And so we need some more plain language information so people can get out here and just understand the budget process. So in conclusion, the fiscal year 26 budget is a pivotal moment for New York City to recommit to transparency, equity, and accountability. By enacting these recommendations, the City Council will not only promote better governance, but also help secure a stronger, fairer future for all New Yorkers. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions from the commissioners?
I just don't have a question. I really wanted to thank you. And, the reason not-for-profit exists is because you do these things much more efficiently and much more closer to the ground than the government can ever do. So I think we need to support you the best we can to get this thing done. So I understand, the frustrations you go through because of the fact that for whatever, I get more confused the budget because it looks like budget is not really a budget. It's not really a budget. So, so we don't know who spends what and where and how much. But I really understand your trouble, and we really wanted to help you the best we can. Thank you.
Thank you.
My comment is, being your former boss until 4 months ago, you did a great job, Navi.
Oh,
Thank you.
Thanks, Joanne. You'll always be my boss in my heart.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? All right, thank you for your testimony today. The next person to testify is Anna Humphrey from the Center for Independence of the Disabled. Are you here, Anna?
Thank you.
Mhm.
Good evening, members of the commission. Thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony tonight on budget transparency. My name is Anna Humphrey, and I am the Transportation and Voting Community Organizer at the Center for Independence of the Disabled New York, or CIDNY. CIDNY is a nonprofit organization founded in 1978, and we are a part of the Independent Living Centers movement, which is a national network of grassroots and community-based organizations that enhance opportunities for all people with disabilities to direct their own lives. As the commission considers reforms to increase transparency in New York City's budget process, we urge you to prioritize equity and inclusion, especially for New Yorkers with disabilities. Budget transparency should be about ensuring that all communities can understand, influence, and benefit from how public funds are spent. CIDNY would like to make the following recommendations, the first of which would be to make budget information accessible to people with disabilities. The New York City Charter should require that all budget-related documents and presentations be provided in accessible formats. This includes plain language summaries of key budget decisions, screen reader compatible documents, and public budget presentations with live captioning, ASL interpretation, and accessible online participation options. The second recommendation is to involve people with disabilities in budget decision-making. We recommend amending the charter to require a disability impact statement for major budget proposals, representation of disabled New Yorkers on key budget-related advisory committees, and consultation with disability-led organizations during the development of agency budgets. When communities help shape how money is spent, transparency and trust for city agencies will grow, but only if every community member can fully participate. As the commission works to strengthen budget transparency, we urge you to recognize accessibility as a core component of an open and equitable government. Transparent budgeting should reflect the needs and rights of people with disabilities at every stage. We thank you for your leadership and look forward to partnering with you to ensure a more inclusive and accountable city budget process. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. I commend the work that you do. I want to ask you something that has a lot of relations to what you testified about. In New York City, at least when it comes to procurement, a lot of the areas are governed by state law in terms of people with disabilities, specifically the New York Industry for the Disabled, who's empowered by the New York State Financial Law to basically appropriate contracts for cleaning, for distributions, for a lot of the work within New York City, as long as it comes within a certain framework, which in my opinion doesn't allow for local organizations like yours and others here in the city to really be available to bid on contracts or get services or allow for policy changes because the state governs. And it makes it hard for us to amend something in the charter that the state would supersede anyway. So in your recommendation to make those changes, do you see a process by which a state continues to override our charter that would make it harder, even if we have the best possible intention, the best possible language, the best legislation to execute here in the city? I'd love to hear your opinion on this, because something that has always been a problem for me.
I honestly don't know if I have a great answer to that question. I mean, I would hope that the city still has some say in those things. But I really don't have a good answer to that, to be honest with you.
Okay, well, thank you. Anyone has questions? All right. No, thank you for your testimony today. And the next two testimonies that we have listed are on Zoom. And I want to test the sound before we start, if you don't mind, because of what happened last time. Starting with Sierra Kraft from iCare Coalition. Are you here?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
We can test the sound, please.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Well, can you start your testimony thing?
Great. Yes. Good evening, commissioners. Thank you for hosting this important hearing on budget transparency and for inviting testimony. My name is Sierra Kraft, and I'm the executive director of the iCare Coalition. We're a coalition of legal service providers dedicated to ensuring that unaccompanied immigrant children in New York City have access to free legal representation. I'm here to speak about the devastating fallout from the abrupt termination of the Federal Unaccompanied Children Program, or UCP, and the urgent need to address vulnerabilities in New York City's funding processes that put essential legal protections for immigrant youth at risk. On March 21st, the federal government impounded nearly all funding for UCP, wiping out over $200 million in funding nationwide and over $10 million here in New York City, employing nearly 200 employees statewide working in this program. This leaves children without an attorney overnight, and that in New York City, over 1,100 open representation cases remain. These are children as young as infants who have fled violence, trafficking, and family separation, who are now being fast-tracked through deportation proceedings without an attorney, often not understanding the process or their rights. And without legal representation, their chances of staying safely in the United States drops dramatically. Our iCare attorneys have over a 90% success rate when working with them, and kids without an attorney have nearly like a 15% chance of winning their case. So legal representation is critical. The federal government's action to defund a program collapsed an entire ecosystem and safety net. Our member organizations are community-rooted nonprofits with decades of experience, and they're having to lay off staff, freeze intakes, and make heartbreaking decisions about which children they can continue to support. And here's where New York's own systems failed to offer a backstop. The Charter Commission's preliminary report correctly highlights two deep vulnerabilities: federal impoundment and slow, unpredictable procurement processes. In our case, when the federal dollars disappeared, there's no local mechanism ready to respond swiftly. The current procurement process is slow, opaque, and reactive, leaving our frontline providers scrambling to fill the gap without the resources to do so. City Council discretionary funding has been incredibly helpful in allowing providers some ability to shift the cases and move more flexibly in response to this crisis. But even that support is not guaranteed, as it's not baselined and it's constrained by the city's procurement process, which makes it chronically delayed. This creates serious cash flow challenges for nonprofit providers and makes it harder to act swiftly in moments of crisis like this one. Had a more responsive system that allows for clear emergency procurement been in place, the city could have mobilized quickly to stabilize services for these kids, but instead, organizations are left stranded trying to keep children from being deported unjustly with no guaranteed funding to sustain the work. We believe New York must build durable protections against federal funding volatility, especially for critical legal services. This means enshrining clearer standards for transparency around impoundment, and creating clear and streamlined emergency procurement and safeguards that allow for immediate stabilization when these vulnerable communities are targeted by federal policy changes. These young people are already here, they attend our schools, they live in our neighborhoods, and they are New York's responsibility. And we have a responsibility to ensure that due process and dignity are not contingent on politics or bureaucracy. Thank you for your time and for the opportunity to share this testimony. Open to any questions you all have.
Yeah, thank you for your testimony. I just want to mention the impoundment issue is not just a federal, but also a local one, as it was explained previously by some of the testimony that we heard before. Are there any questions for Ms. Graft?
Yes, I have a question. What do I face? Hi. Thank you for your testimony. I'm just sort of reflecting on the news over the past few days and few weeks, and specifically the cases where actually U.S. citizens who are children were deported. Now I don't believe that was in New York, but I guess what I'm trying to figure out is where the powers of the government and the powers of local municipalities, where do they begin and end? And when you have a federal government that's as aggressive as the one that we have, I'm just wondering the extent to which your recommendations, so let's just say that kind of legal infrastructure was in place in those situations where those children were deported, would that ultimately have prevented that? Or is the power of the federal government in those moments such that even when you have those safeguards, when you have that legal infrastructure, it cannot prevent an aggressive federal government like we have now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think ultimately the courts hold the power to make the decisions on individual cases. I think what I'm speaking about is the nonprofit power of pro bono and immigration attorneys that we built up over decades long experience. And so when somebody has the right to an attorney, which we're trying to get at the federal and the state level, they're nearly guaranteed to win their case if there is a form of relief available to them. But without the proper funding, it makes it very challenging to get access to an attorney. So I don't think we could have necessarily prevented these deportations from happening, but I think without a robust legal ecosystem where immigrants have access and the right enshrined in law to have access to an attorney, then it puts all of us in a very precarious spot that when you're trying to defend yourself against a regime that's trying to deport you, you really don't stand a chance. You need a qualified attorney.
Although some of the reports that we've heard already had shown that sometimes the children are already in other countries, like we saw the case in both Honduras and El Salvador by the time they reach an attorney. I think it speaks to the commissioner's comments about the aggressiveness of this current administration to deport human beings, including citizens of this country. That has great concern, at least to me, as an individual, not just as a commissioner. So we thank you for the work that you do and thank you for your testimony. Are there any other questions for the witness? All right, well, thank you for your testimony. We're now going to hear testimony from, forgive me if I mispronounce this, Patri Narcanas. Numonur. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. If you could just kindly tell us how to better pronounce your name, or if I did justice, please start your testimony now.
Good afternoon, everyone. Assalamualaikum. My name is Putri Rangkamanis, and I'm the artistic director and founder of Kindling Sindao, a 33-year-old cultural organization that asserts, reclaim, preserve, and indigenous heritage in diaspora. I'm very grateful that there is this commission that is giving attention to budgeting and sharing it to the public like us, and making us community members be heard with our concerns with our own budgets as we go along as a non-for-profit. So my concern that I'm bringing up here is the importance of culture and tradition, particularly for immigrants, people in diaspora like me, to continue to exist and get given attention, and be part of the budgeting process of the city and state, because this is the one that holds the foundational community and uplift the mental health of the individuals, especially the coming in of new immigrants and the second generation. Being home, away from home, is a big strength and organizing power of the community that will be able to contribute to the process of building a community in New York City. Most of my contentions are already mentioned by other people, other non-for-profit who spoke before me. But I'm just highlighting that culture and tradition of immigrants, of people in diaspora, is very essential as a foundation for highlighting, uplifting mental health and our inspiration to go on living, being displaced from or being away from home. And I think all of us has that kind of lineage, and it's very important that it is given attention in the process of budgeting and giving attention to non-for-profit who's working with this community. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your testimony. Are there any questions? Go ahead, man.
I just wanted to thank you for your testimony, and between your testimony and the previous testimony, I think as we go through our work, it's going to be incredibly important for us to think about, are we meeting the moment of the threats from the federal government? Are we meeting the moments for the city? And I think immigration is at the center of the challenges that the city is facing right now and is going to face in the coming years. So I just want to thank you for your work, and thank you for bringing this to our attention.
Thank you. Welcome.
All right. So thank you for your testimony. This concludes the testimony part of those who have signed to testify today. I just have a number of announcements to make regarding our next hearings. I want to remind everyone that the next hearing is scheduled for Tuesday, May 8th at Restoration Plaza in Brooklyn. That hearing will be focusing on government accountability. Following that hearing, Monday, May 12th at the Bronx Museum of Arts, focusing on land use. And Wednesday, May 14th at the Staten Island Museum of Snug Harbor, focusing on budget transparency. We also have another hearing following that one on May 19th at John Jay College in Manhattan, focusing also on government accountability. Okay, pardon me. The first hearing is May 6th, not May 8th. Sorry. May 6th, Tuesday, May 6th at Restoration Plaza in Brooklyn, focusing on government accountability. All the hearings will be held 5 to 7 p.m. and folks are all invited to testify either in person or via Zoom, like we saw today. Registration and further details on our hearings are on our website. at www.thecommission.nyc and www.thecommission.nyc. With that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion has been made. Do I have a second? All right, let's take a vote. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any nays, any abstention? The ayes have it, and so order. We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody, for your participation today.